Thank you for being here this morning, especially those of you who are visiting with us. We have had a fantastic weekend here at Laurel Canyon, and we're happy that many of you who have been with us Friday night and all day yesterday are able to be with us once again this morning. We're going to be in Romans chapter 12 in just a few moments, but before we begin, if you would bow with me, let's start off our day together with a word of prayer, please. Our Father who is in heaven, we give all honor and glory and reverence to you and your awesome name. Father, we acknowledge that you are high above us, that you are our creator, that you are our sustainer, that every good and perfect gift comes from you. Father, we so desperately need you. We need your intervention in our lives. We need the light of your word. We thank you that your word continues to serve as a lamp to our feet and a light to our pathway. We pray that you would be with us as we look into your word this morning. Thank you for the amazing book of Romans. Thank you for the incredible knowledge and insight that we can get on you and on your will for our lives and what you've done down through the ages. But we thank you also for the practical instruction and encouragement, things that we can draw into our lives and apply to our lives. We pray today as we focus on your call to be living sacrifices that are holy and acceptable in your sight. We pray that we would have hearts that are ready to be shaped as sacrifices. We pray that we would get it in our minds from the very beginning of this new week that our walk with you is not confined to the walls of this building, that we're not just giving you something today and then going on the rest of our week in whatever way we choose, that you want to shape us and our very lifestyles. We pray that you would help us to develop hearts to know and to trust that your way is the best way, that you've told us what you've told us for our good and for the good of other people and for your ultimate glory. Please be with all who are studying and teaching throughout this building this morning. Help us to get our minds set so that throughout this day we can encourage each other, praise and honor and glorify you. All of this hope is ours because your Son is no longer in the grave. We pray in his glorious name this morning. Amen. Romans chapter 12 is where we are. One more time, if you need material for this morning, if you would raise your hand high so that Eric can see it. Take just a moment to appreciate with me where we have been. We have been 17 weeks in covering the first 11 chapters of Romans. The plan is to be done with Romans on the last Sunday of September. But you can see there at the top of page 67, with the beginning of Romans 12, we have reached the turning point in Paul's letter to the Romans. And I want you to take a moment and think with me about where we have been. Kind of like a submarine, there have been times that we have dipped very, very, very deep into deep waters, rich doctrinal teaching, and every once in a while we've come up and we've put up our periscope and kind of looked around to make sure that we appreciate where we've been and where we are. And that is the case this morning. In Romans chapter 1, Gentiles are guilty before God. In Romans chapter 2, Jews are guilty before God. In Romans chapter 3, none is righteous, no, not one. In Romans chapter 4, our justification before God depends on faith. In Romans chapter 5, grace can reign through Jesus Christ. Whereas sin and death have reigned before it, now grace can reign. In Romans chapter 6, that led us to, okay, if Romans 1 through 5 are true, how can we who died to sin still live in it? Romans 1, 2, and 3, here's the problem. Romans 4 and 5, here is the way that God has intervened we can die to sin. We can live to righteousness. Grace can come to reign in our lives. But if that's the case, we've got to get away from sin. We've got to quit dabbling in sin. And now in Romans 7 and 8 and beyond, Paul begins to draw out what this means, particularly in this context, for Jews, but also for Gentiles. He goes back and forth, back and forth. We are released from the law that we may serve in the new way of the Spirit. In Romans chapter 8, if God is for us, who can be against us? In Romans 9, speaking specifically to Jews, not all are children of Abraham because they are his physical offspring. In Romans chapter 10, Paul laments the fact that Israel has a great zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. And something tragic is resulting. As a result, they are not submitting to God's righteousness. Last week in Romans chapter 11, especially there at the very end of Romans 11, we have this great cap, this great icing on top of everything that Paul talks about in Romans chapter 1 through 11. Oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. It's a fantastic way of summarizing Romans 1 through 11. Here is the riches and the wisdom and the knowledge of God. And just appreciate how deep and how glorious all of that the Spirit of God reveals through Paul to the Romans, and by extension to you and to me, even 2,000 years later. We turn our attention now with this turning point to Romans chapter 12. And as we've got in the material, one of the absolute key words here at the very beginning of Romans chapter 12 is therefore. We try and drill into our minds as Bible students that anytime we run across that word, it is there for a reason, right? And it is serving as a link. In this case, we've got the enormous weight, glorious weight of Romans 1 through 11, and now we've got this word therefore that is connecting that glorious weight to something else. Romans 1 through 11 is like a big foundation of a house that God is building. Here are, as the foundation, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. Romans chapter 12 through 16, where we will be, Lord willing, throughout the rest of September, presenting our bodies as living sacrifices to God. And what does that look like? Whether we are a Jew or a Gentile, whether we're a male or female, whether we're rich or poor, slave or free, whomever we are, Paul is going to show us, the Spirit of God is going to show us, in light of this glorious foundation, look at what God has done and look at what God is willing to do in your life. Now, this is the way we live as children of God. In Romans chapter 12, Paul is making an appeal. And so let me ask you from the very beginning this morning, if you make an appeal to someone, what are you doing? What does it mean to make an appeal? Alan?
You're appealing to what you've just taught.
Okay.
And this here is more like God's righteousness in everyday life.
All right.
And beside that, God's mercy is henceforth because of what you or Gentile, what you've been taught in the first 11 verses.
Okay. It's an important principle, right? Good appeals, logical appeals, pretty much appeals that work, have some sort of a ground or a context, right? That's true in this instance, and it is true in our own lives. You think if your teenager comes and says, "Dad, can I have the car all night?" Odds are there's going to need to be a little bit of context, right? There's going to need to be a little bit of a foundation that is associated with that appeal. Otherwise, the appeal very well may be soundly denied or something like that. And so an appeal has some sort of a context. What else does it mean if we make an appeal? Ruby?
Or you're asking someone or begging someone to do something.
Okay.
Or listening to something.
Yeah. There's a context. Something is missing or something is needed or something is wanting. And now I'm presenting that need or that want or that issue before someone, and I'm looking for a response, right? An appeal implies I'm aware of something and you need to respond to it. And so let me communicate that and try and get you to respond. David?
I was going to say what you were saying. You're about to present some evidence
Okay.
of why
Yeah.
you want that person to respond.
Absolutely. That's what Paul is doing here, right? Romans chapter 1 through 11 is the context. Romans 12 through 16 is, this is what you need to do. We've got the evidence of the first 11 chapters. And now, in light of that, let me plead with you to respond in the way that your Creator would have you to respond. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God. There's a little bit more on the context side of everything. Now, I want you to think, Paul has talked a whole lot in Romans 1 through 11. There have been long, glorious, deep, weighty sections. And Paul has talked about a whole lot of things concerning God. He's talked about the wrath of God. He's talked about the existence of God. He's talked about the justice of God. He's talked about the grace of God. He's talked about the judgment of God. Many, many, many different things. And so why, out of everything that Paul has talked about in Romans 1 through 11, why does he root his appeal in the mercies of God? Let's not take that for granted. A lot of things that could be attached to this link. Why this thing? Donna?
Asking for something you don't deserve.
Okay. It very much establishes the need, right? Romans 1 through 11, we all, regardless of our family tree, regardless of what was done to us when we were 8 days old, whether we had Jewish parents or Gentile parents, we all are in need of God's mercy. David?
I think Nathan made a point yesterday about the grace of God and the mercies, and this appeal is only going to be made possible because of what God's Son did.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, this is the crowning achievement of the gospel, right? Yes, the wrath of God is implied within this. Otherwise, mercy really isn't all that big of a deal, right? Wrath is built in this. Accountability is built in this. Our own guilt is built within this. But what makes this good news is God is willing to show us mercy. And so don't turn your back on that and fail to live the life the Spirit of God is calling you to lead. Craig, go ahead.
You kind of said what I was going to say, that he's begging us to take advantage of it.
All right, yeah.
It's there for us, and this urging, this appeal, this pleading to take advantage
Sure.
of it.
Absolutely. Let's make sure that you think about the way that this is described in other contexts. God is holy. He wants us to be holy. If we will respond, we bring holiness to completion in the fear of God, okay? Romans chapter 12 and verse 1. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God. What is this appeal? Well, it involves me presenting something. And what does it mean if I present something, especially to someone who is an authority figure? What does it mean if I present something to someone who is greater than myself? I show it to them. I'm bringing them something for approval. I am showing myself willing to do what they would have me to do. I mean, we learn that at a very young age, right? Our 4th or 5th or 6th grade teacher tells us to come up with a science project, and maybe mom and dad had more to do with it than I did, but I'm the one who does the presenting, right? I bring that and I put it up on the table, and then the teacher comes by and this is what I have to present, okay? Or you think in the context of a great king, where a lowly subject would come and present himself or present herself before the king. And we're going to think about Esther and King Ahasuerus, where Esther presents herself before the king, and now it is up to the king as to how he's going to respond. Paul has spent Romans 1 through 11 getting in our minds, God is the king, and we are all guilty in his sight. But God is willing to show us mercy. And so now let me, as a representative, an ambassador of this king, Paul would say, make this appeal to you. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present not your riches, not all of the accumulated wealth or resources that you can present, because it would be one thing, of course, to come up with a bunch of stuff and then give it to him and then go and do what I want. But that's not what this king wants. Present your bodies as a living sacrifice. Now, you and I, we're away as far as distance when it comes to the idea of sacrifices. As far as I know, not one of you has ever slit the throat of a lamb and put it on top of an altar and lit it on fire. If you have, let me know. I'd like to talk with you about that. I haven't. I've never seen something like that. Maybe we can talk more about it afterwards. But you and I, generally speaking, perhaps universally speaking, are this is something that we read about, this is something that we imagine, but this is not everyday life. And yet for Jew and Gentile, generally speaking, this happens in Jerusalem under the Jewish system. This happens in Athens. This happens in Rome at all of these pagan temples and everything. But there's one thing that these people know, right? If you're going to make a sacrifice, how alive is that sacrifice? Not very, right? Sacrifices are pretty much dead, usually. And so this word, let's make sure that we don't just gloss over that word as something that we've read before. What is Paul communicating? What is the Spirit of God communicating when he says, present your bodies as a living sacrifice? That is a profound idea. Alan, what's going on?
Well, your body is not going to die.
Okay.
You live for Christ.
Yeah. We're not talking about human sacrifice, right? We know, unfortunately, there were very, very dark periods of human history where even Jewish kings would offer their own children literally as human sacrifices to some idol. We're not talking about that. So if that's not what we're talking about, what are we talking about? Don?
I think it also has to do with continual. So
Okay.
it's not just that you're going
Yeah.
to be doing it actively and continually while you live.
Yeah.
for Jesus.
Yeah. This is going to be an ongoing, this is going to speak to our lifestyle. We are called to live a lifestyle of sacrifice. Sandy, go ahead.
As a living sacrifice, it's a body, it means a body and our soul.
Okay.
And that we are part of Christ.
Right. God wants me, right? Not just mental assent on my part, not just outward motions on my part. God wants me, body, heart, soul, spirit. He wants me to be invested. He has spent 11 chapters telling me how invested He is in me, and now He wants me to just be so blown away by that now I would live for Him for the rest of my life. Eric, what's going on here?
Paul has already made the declaration in the book of Romans that Christ presented Himself as the sacrifice once for all to remove sin.
Yeah.
And so he's making a distinction that He doesn't want us to do that. We can't do that.
Yeah.
Because Christ has done that for us. And so the appeal that Paul is making is he wants us to live in a way that presents ourselves for Christ.
Absolutely. It's a great thing to remind us of the overall context. I'm not doing this in order to atone for my sins, right? I can't do that. It does not matter what I am able to muster now. There is nothing that I can do to outweigh or somehow blot out my guilt before God. My only hope is the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. And now the aim is that my heart would be so impacted that I'm ready. What can I do? What would you have me to do? Like clay in the hands of a potter, right? Bo, did you have your hand raised? Or somebody else have their hand raised back there? Greg, go ahead.
Well, and the idea of Christ's sacrifice and the idea even of the sacrifices that they were to give under the old law, it was to be the best without blemish.
All right.
When we think about a living sacrifice, then what does that say to us? What ought we to be given?
Yeah, and Paul qualifies this sacrifice, right? That is exactly right, that we need to be aware of what sort of sacrifice God is calling us to be. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies, give yourself to God as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. Why is that last phrase so very weighty? Alex?
That's the standard by which we are to present ourselves.
Yeah. I don't get to decide what that sacrifice looks like. I mean, that's a very immature way of thinking, right? We understand. Students don't get to decide what the curriculum is, or children ought not to be in the position of determining what the expectations at home are. Employees don't get to determine the corporate policy, right? And in very much that same sort of a vein, I'm not in position of authority. It's not that, well, okay, I give this to God and God says, you know, that's pretty good. Why don't you just go ahead and as long as you're sincere and you say you love me, you just go ahead and do your own thing. No. There is an ultimate standard, and I am to respect that standard. We spent a good amount of time yesterday reminding ourselves, God is holy and He wants me to be holy. This is a lifestyle. You know, one of the tricky things about a living sacrifice is when it gets hot, it's easy to crawl off the altar, right? It's not easy to be alive and to stay on the altar as a sacrifice, but that is what we are being called to be, because it's not up to us. It is up to the one who is holy and who has defined what is acceptable. Alan, you had your hand raised. Go ahead.
An example is when Paul writes to the brethren of Galatians, they was worshiping under the Roman gospel.
Yeah. Paul says, I am astonished that you are so quickly turning away. He would say the same sort of thing here, right? I am astonished that he could write by inspiration of the Spirit of God what he did in Romans 1 through 11, and then people would be unwilling to do what God calls them to do. We know, unfortunately, tragically, that was, and it is, and it will be a reality. We spent some time a few Sunday mornings ago just learning from people who refused to turn at the call of God. Paul ends what we have as Romans 12 and verse 1 with this qualification. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship, or the American Standard translates that, which is your spiritual service, or the New King James translates that, which is your reasonable service. All of which is coming to enhance our understanding that God is God, I am not. It is reasonable, it is right, it is appropriate, it is logical that He would call me to do this. He has every right to do this. And even as I do it, I am unworthy of even being invited into the conversation. Romans 1 through 11 is all about that. Let's press on here. Romans chapter 12 and verse 2. Do not be conformed to this world. I'm a big fan of words. And sometimes I can look at the original word that Paul used and it means absolutely nothing to me. But I recognize certain things in this word. I'm not sure I could tell you how it's pronounced, but I know what the word is. Does that word look like anything in our English or our English vernacular? Schema. Yeah, a schema. What is a schema?
It's a system that's been set in place.
Yeah. It's also very, very close to our English word systematize, right? If you systematize something, what are you doing? Yeah? You're taking all sorts of parts and you're bringing them into, if you think about a big spreadsheet, you're going to bring them into rows and columns and you're going to bring them all into line, right? We noticed the same sort of thing when we listened to Paul talking about justification. And we talked about our English word justification. There's some sort of a margin, some sort of a standard. And God is willing to take all of the messy parts of me and justify them and bring them into line. But God is not the only one who is willing and able to systematize me. This world is very capable and willing of systematizing me. Now let's make sure that we appreciate when Paul talks about this world in this context, that word can be used in all sorts of ways. Is he talking about the earth that we're standing on? No. What is he talking about? If it's not this earth, this globe, what is it?
Paul talks so much in his epistles about living according to the flesh versus living according to the spirit.
All right.
If we're conformed to this world, we're living according to the flesh because that's what this world does.
Yeah. It is the way of the world, right? Romans 1 through 11 has made clear just how dark this world is, and this world has shaping influence. You think about the idea of clay in a potter's hand and how clay is conformed according to the skill and the will of the potter. Or you think about a cookie cutter. You got a big lump of dough and you slam that cookie cutter down and suddenly everything within the scope of that shape now has been systematized in a way, right? It's been conformed, and you take everything else out, and what was just abstract now has a definite shape. And Paul is trying to get us to understand, this world will shape you. This world has shaped you. We have all sinned. We have all fallen short of the glory of God. But don't love this world. Why? John tells us that in 1 John 2, right? All that fills this world, the lust of the eyes and the lust of the flesh and vain pride of human life, it's not of the Father, it's of this world. And this world is passing away, along with all of that filth, okay? And so I'm brought to a fork in the road. I'm going to be shaped by something, someone. There is no neutral territory here. It is either or. I will be shaped by my Creator, or I will be systematized right along with this world to think like the world and talk like the world and prioritize like the world and all of those things. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed. And again, the power of words here. That's awfully close to our English word, what? Metamorphosis, right? We learn about that even as children. How a caterpillar goes to a pupa, goes to a butterfly. That is the process of metamorphosis, something changing. Even in this instance, this little worm that suddenly transforms into something beautiful that is able to fly. You wouldn't guess it if you'd never seen that or never heard about that. Never guess that little hairy woolly worm could somehow get to the point where it could fly. But that's what happens by God's design. And that is exactly what he's telling us here. Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed. How do you do that? We spent a significant amount of time yesterday, especially when we were talking with our parents about the battle for the mind. You want to impact a child's hands and feet and sexuality and the way they use their mouths and all of this. It is a battle for the mind. I will not be transformed if my mind is not like clay in the hands of my Creator. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. God wants us to think differently and prioritize differently and value differently and treasure different things and be dedicated to different things and treat other people in a different way. He's not just trying to tweak a few little character flaws in my life. It's not just, I've got 6 okay habits and 7 pretty bad habits, and if I can get the 7 over and get 13, I'm doing pretty good. No, it's not a worm that you glue wings on. That's not going to help anything. It's real change from the inside, right? From the mind, so that by testing you may discern what is the will of God. If I discern something, what does that mean? I analyze it. I really see it, right? I mean, it's one thing to see, and it's another thing to discern. Lots of us, when we first get married, we see all sorts of things, but we don't necessarily discern things, and then we begin to learn, right, and have this ability not just to see with our physical eyes, but to see with the eyes of our mind and understand. Paul has spent 11 chapters helping us discern the will of God. Sandy, you had your hand raised. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that when you discern something, you're finding out what it's worth.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. We have all been guilty of undervaluing God and His will, right? And He is helping us to see what we really need to see. If you haven't been following along and wouldn't mind, let's go back on in our material to page 69. God's will is described as what is good and acceptable and perfect. Here in this last minute, just look at this closing thought with me. God is willing to show such incredible mercy to us. I hope, if nothing else, that has come through in the first 11 chapters of Romans. God is willing to show such incredible mercy. We've reminded ourselves over and over again about the bookends of this letter. Romans 1, Romans 16. God is seeking to bring about the obedience of faith, outward and inward, right? With my body and with my mind. That is the obedience of faith. Rendering the obedience of faith to Him involves so much more than weekend attendance in an assembly of Christians, offering the occasional religious thought or action to God. That doesn't honor Him, and that will most certainly not transform me, right? He is calling for a fundamental change at the level of my heart, in my very manner of daily life. If we will present ourselves as clay in His perfect hands, we will come to begin to see this was the best way all along. Here it is. It's been preserved for thousands of years. And if I had just listened, I wouldn't have gotten in nearly the amount of trouble, experienced nearly the amount of heartache that I have. But of course, it's not too late to experience that transformation. We can be transformed. We can be glorified. It's just 2 verses, but it is absolutely just key, vital to our understanding of what God wants of us. I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate your interaction this morning. Thank you.